What is going on, YouTube? So coming back with my edge rusher slash defensive end big board. So this is going to include both defensive ends, obviously, and then also like edge rush specialists, and like maybe like a Leonard Floyd type is a good example. So before I get into this, there were a few names that I mentioned yesterday that could easily have been counted as defensive ends. Sheldon Day, Jonathan Bullard, and Anthony Zettel come to mind, and I list them under my defensive tackle, so I'm not going to do them again. For me, they were dominant as defensive ends, so I'm going to keep, or defensive tackles, so I'm going to keep them in that ranking. So go ahead and start with my number one, and I think this is a clear number one. That's Joey Bosa. So 6'6", 275 pounds out of Ohio State. I think he's a pretty clear top 5 pick. I'm going to give my overall big board rankings at the end of this series, so I'm not going to say exactly where I would have him. I don't really know exactly where I would have him either. So Joey Bosa, obviously a guy who really is just extremely talented, just bowls through people, and didn't have a whole lot of sacks this year as a lot of people expected. He only had 5. He missed the season opener, but it's pretty weird right now how scouts are seeing him. Some people see him as overhyped. Other people see him as, the clear-cut defensive end in the draft. He is one of the most talented players in this draft. He's got a really, really good motor, very athletic, and will definitely draw a lot of attention in the NFL. Now, one comparison I see made a lot, including on a lot of the scout sites that I look on, is the comparison to Ryan Kerrigan. And yeah, Brian Kerrigan wasn't worth a top 5 pick, but he's still a solid player. So if you say that Joey Bosa being a bust at the absolute worst is like him turning out like Ryan Kerrigan, then that's still a pretty good bust, I guess. So J.J. Watt's the other comparison made for Joey Bosa, and that would obviously be a very, very good that would be a very, very good way to turn out. So move on to my second defensive end, and I have the. Let's see if I can find it here. Six, 6'7", 290-pound defensive end out of Oregon. That's DeForest Buckner. So Buckner, for me, is also the clear-cut number 2. I think that this 1-2 ranking is about as clear-cut as any position besides maybe quarterback. So DeForest Buckner, to me, still projects as a first-round pick, probably early to middle first round. I could see top 10, but it'd be the latter half of the top 10. And I think the great thing about DeForest Buckner is just his overall athleticism. Had very, very, very good numbers this year. 16 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. He's a very lanky guy. He's got obviously very good size. He can line up probably at either defensive end or, like I said, outside linebacker in a 3-4 in a 3-4 style defense. So the comparison's been made quite a bit to Eric Armstead, and I think that's a very good comparison. And I do think DeForest Buckner is a guy that's going to be very successful in the NFL. Some people think not, but yeah, I can see that actually turning out very well. So move on to my next defensive end, and I have the 6'4", I believe. Yes, 6'4", 296-pound defensive end and defensive tackle actually out of Ole Miss, Robert Nkemdiche. So I think Nkemdiche's going to end up playing defensive end in the NFL. I don't know where he's going to fall. He's got extremely good speed. The 4.8 40 time, I think, is a little bit. I think he's going to run closer to a 4.7 when he's doing his combine. I think that Nkemdiche is a guy that obviously was troubled this year. Probably would have been a top 5 pick if he hadn't got suspended to miss the Sugar Bowl. But that just kind of exposed a whole host of problems for Nkemdiche, and really was the worst time for that to happen. So move on to my next one, and I have the, I believe, 6'4", 230-pound outside linebacker out of Georgia, and that's Leonard Floyd. So I think Floyd's a very talented edge rusher. Had 4.5 sacks this year, which wasn't not extremely impressive, but 74 tackles, 10.5 for loss. That was good. He's a very, very, very fast pass rusher. He runs a 4.6 40. Hard guy to get away from. I think he's one of the safer picks in the draft, and I think he's got very high upside. I think he's a guy that will probably go in the middle of the first round, and really be a solid pick for whoever is able to get him. So move on to my number 5 defensive end, and I know this one's going to be up in the air a little bit. a lot of people think he should go earlier than this. I've seen a few sites that actually have him going later, but I have the 6'3", 275-pound defensive end / outside linebacker out of Clemson, Shaq Lawson. So I have Shaq Lawson going in the middle of the first round. I think he could go. I could see him slipping to the end of the first round if guys like Calhoun and Emmanuel Ogbah end up going a little bit earlier, and maybe Leonard Floyd, Robert Nkemdiche fall a little bit, so it adds a little bit of cluster to the defensive end stockpile. But also, Shaq Lawson is a guy that got a lot of good exposure this year, showed that he could play through injury in the national championship, and I think the hard part for him is fitting into a defense. So he's a little bit undersized to be a 3-4 defensive end. I could definitely play a 4-3 defensive end, but he is also a little bit slow to be able to play outside linebacker in a 4-3. And I could see him ending up, I don't think he very... Let me rephrase this. I don't see him being a very good comparison to Vic Beasley. I think they're very different players. But I do still think that Shaq Lawson is a good enough talented enough player. He's a good enough pass rusher. Really, really, really good stats this year. 25 and a half tackles for loss, 12 and a half sacks. I think he put up good enough stats and proved himself enough this year that he can be able to really just not fall out of the first round. So, move on to my number 6 defensive end, and I have the 6'5", 250-pound outside linebacker / defensive end out of Michigan State, and that is Shalik Calhoun. So, Shalik Calhoun is a guy for me that projects as a middle to late first round pick. I think he's a guy that was very impressive to a lot of teams, though. He runs about a 4.7 40, maybe. I think that's pretty accurate, and I could see him going. I think he fits in well as a 4-3 defensive end, and could be a 3-4 outside linebacker as well. I think that he could maybe end up sliding up to the middle or early first round if he, like I said, he fit in well with a lot of teams. So I think a guy that has that good of intangibles, has proved himself that much, could end up sliding that high. But for me, like I said, late first round. He's a guy that had decent stats this year, 8 sacks. So, like I said, a reliable pick. I think he's a lot like Leonard Floyd in that comparison, where you probably know what you're going to get, and you're probably going to end up getting a solid guy there. So move on to my number 7 defensive end. And I have the 6'4", 275-pound edge rusher out of Oklahoma State, and that is Emmanuel Ogbah. So I go to Oklahoma State, so Ogbah I saw a lot firsthand this year, and was up and down this year, had a better season his junior year, but he's a guy that still saw his draft stock rise this year because he wasn't a very present name at the beginning of the year, was a little bit flying under the radar. And I think it still could be that way. He's a guy that developed very, very, very well in college. Was a 3-star recruit coming out, and now is obviously heading up to be a first-round pick. And you know what? I think that even though I'm saying he didn't have that good a year, it was still 13 sacks. And he played against a lot of good offensive linemen. Many first-round picks. Anywhere from 1st to 4th round picks, very big name offensive lineman, Cody Whitehair, Laraven Clark, Laramie Tunsil, and still ended up with 13 sacks on the year. And again, I think I'm saying that more because he finished the year slow, but for me he projects as probably a late first round pick, but I see it the absolute worst sliding down to the early second round. So move on to my number 8 defensive end, and I have the 6'7", 272-pound defensive end out of Penn State, and that's Carl Nassib. So Nassib had a good season this year, forced a lot of fumbles, I believe 6 on the year, and led the nation with 15 and a half sacks, so really put up some good numbers this year. And he's a guy that I think could fit in very, very, very well as a 3-4 defensive end. He's got the size, and I think he'd really fit in anywhere. He doesn't really. I don't think he has the speed to fit in as a 3-4 outside linebacker. But I think really any scheme you work him in at defensive end with is going to work well for him. And I see him as a 1st to 2nd round pick, early 1st round probably at the best, and maybe early 3rd round at the worst. I don't see that happening though. If I had to say, I'd probably say early 2nd round is the best bet for him. Alright, so move on to my number 9. And he is the, I want to say 6'4", 6'1", was way off. 6'1", 246-pound outside linebacker, Arizona, and that is Scooby Wright. So Wright lost a lot of his stock this year. It went very far down just because of his injuries, and really had an explosive 2014 where he was one of the best players in the country defensively, and kind of a sad thing that he had to sit out for so long this year. I get it, he is more of a linebacker than a defensive end, but he is still an edge rusher in my book. So I have him as a 2nd and 3rd round, probably middle of the 2nd would be the best bet. I think whatever team gets him, if he's able to stay away from injury, then you pretty much get a steal. I think he's definitely a 1st round talent. Flashed that in 2014. Also flashed that in the New Mexico Bowl this year, and showed what 2015 could have been if he hadn't had all those nagging leg injuries. So move on to my number 10 defensive end, and I have the, let's see if I can find it here. Oh, this is terrible. Alright. 6'5", 275-pounder out of Clemson, and that is Kevin Dodd. So Kevin Dodd, to me, fits in well as really either a 3-4 or a 4-3 defensive end. I think he's got the size to play both. He's got decent speed, runs a 4.8 40 for his size. That's pretty good. Dodd had a good showing in the national championship as well. For me, he projects as a 2nd to 3rd round pick. Some people even have him as high as the very early 2nd round. I could see that happening, but for me, it's probably a late 2nd round pick would be the most realistic thing for him. So move on to my number 11 defensive end, and I've got the 6'4", 236-pounder out of Virginia Tech, Daddy Nicholas. So Daddy Nicholas is probably going to be either a 3-4 or a 4-3 defensive end, or most likely, I think the best scheme he fits in is a 3-4 defense where he's playing at outside linebacker. He is very light, but he's also pretty fast. He has a nose for the football, can get to the quarterback very well, and really just not a great final season for Daddy Nicholas. Had a decent turnout in the bowl game, and I believe on the final play for Virginia Tech on defense this year actually had a sack on, I can't put my finger on Tulsa's quarterback right now, but big play to end out Frank Beamer's career, and I think that Daddy Nicholas is still a 3rd to 4th round talent, which is where I have him projected. At the beginning of the year, he was coming in. Some people even had him projected as high as the late 1st round. Obviously, don't see that happening. The measurables aren't necessarily there. He's got decent size, height-wise, but weight-wise, it's not there. And for the weight, you'd hope that he'd be maybe a 4.6 speed, but still 4.7's not terrible. So actually, that is pretty fast for the players that I'm comparing him to in these rankings. So it's just the maybe put on a few pounds, and obviously the numbers hurt him a little bit this year. So for me, I'd say mid-3rd round probably the most likely scenario for Daddy Nicholas. Alright, so move on to my number 12, and I have the 6'2", 255-pound defensive end / outside linebacker out of Maryland. I guess you're going to have to bear with me on the name here, and that's Yannick Ngakoue. I think I've heard him both ways. Had very, very good stats this year. I think he's got a lot of potential to play, or a lot of potential in the NFL. For his size, he's decently fast, runs about a 4.8 to a 4.85 40, and for me, he projects as a 3rd, 4th round pick, but I think this is a guy that, if he has a good showing, Senior Bowl, Combine, could maybe even slide up to being a 2nd round pick. I don't think he's a big enough name to be able to slide up into the 1st round, but I think early 2nd round, with the amount of flash he's shown and the stats he put up this year with 13.5 sacks, 15 for loss, that's obviously very respectable numbers in a Power 5 conference, and like I said, I think a guy that has a very upward trending draft stock right now. So move on to my number 13, and I have the 6'2", 253-pounder out of Georgia, and that is Jordan Jenkins. So for me, Jordan Jenkins projects as a 3rd or 4th round pick. Some people have him as high as the late 2nd round. I don't think he's going to slide up that high. Might have been a little bit overshadowed at Georgia, obviously playing next to Leonard Floyd, but also you could say it opened up his game a little bit. For me, probably an early 4th round pick would be most likely, because this area of the rankings, it's pretty heavy for this point in the draft, which is right around the end of day 2. So move on to my number 14, and I have the, I want to say 6'7". Yes, 6'9", excuse me, 6'9", 275-pounder out of Baylor, and that is Sean Oakman. So obviously Sean Oakman has the measurables to be a 1st-round pick in this draft. I even saw him as high. I think there was even one mock draft at the beginning of May of last year that had him going number 1, and I mean, I never saw that. Obviously, his work ethic cost him, was suspended for a little bit of this year. Didn't have great stats either. Took a lot of plays off. Seemed like Jadeveon Clowney syndrome to the extreme. And for his size, running a 4.8 40, obviously very, very good. For me, he projects right now as a 3rd to 4th round pick. Obviously has the size to fit into really any defensive end scheme. Obviously, if he plays up to his talent and his potential, then you're getting a great player here. But I don't know. It's a risky pick for me. It's about the same risk level as Robert Nkemdiche, but that's why he slid down. And for me, he projects as a middle 4th round pick, and I guess in a middle 4th round, you're not risking that much to take Sean Oakman. So move on to my number 15, and I have the 6'4", 281-pound defensive end out of Oklahoma, Charles Tapper. So Tapper had a good season this year, playing alongside Eric Stryker, very talented duo at OU. For me, he projects as a 3rd to 4th round pick, probably middle to late 4th round is the most likely scenario. Good show out, proving his skill set that he had in college at the Senior Bowl and Combine could do him. I think could do him actually wonders, maybe slide him up into middle of the 3rd round, which is why I have that label on there for his projection. Does have decent speed for his size. 4.8 40 is good for a 281-pound defensive end. He will fit in well for me at either 4.3 or 3.4 defensive end. He did play in the 3.4 scheme in college, so I think either way it could work out for him. So moving to my 5 outside, again, these guys are going to be late 4th round or later in the draft. And start out with my first one, and I have the 6'4", 254-pounder out of Ohio State, Joshua Perry. So Joshua Perry is a guy I'm not exactly sure how to figure out a good projection for him. There's projections having him going as high as the early 3rd round, and then there's some that don't even have him getting drafted at all. For me, I see him again as I kind of meet in the middle at a late 4th round, maybe early 5th round pick, but I don't know. If I'm unsure of any one player on this list, it's definitely Joshua Perry. So move on to my number 2 on the 5 outside, and he is the 6'3", 252-pounder out of Eastern Kentucky, Noah Spence. So Noah Spence is a guy that I think is another risky pick. He's a FCS guy, obviously from Eastern Kentucky. Runs a very fast 40 at 4.7, though had very impressive numbers this year. He played for Ohio State at one point, was suspended for a little bit of the year, though, so he had to transfer to Eastern Kentucky because of getting kicked out of Ohio State. Failed drug test, arrest, I think a combination of both. But for me, a guy, if he can play up to his potential, stay out of trouble, would be a steal in around the late 4th round, 5th round. Talent-wise, I think he's a 2nd-round pick, but that's just talent-wise. So move on to my number 3 on the 5 outside, and I have the 6'7", 265-pounder out of BYU, and that is Bronson Hill. I want to say that's right. So had good stats this year, 11 sacks, 20 tackles for loss, 64 tackles, and he's got pretty good measurables, overall good athleticism, got good hands, obviously good size, decent speed. Not great at getting off blocks, which is why I think he is in my 5 outside and not actually inside my top 15. I think a good outing in the Senior Bowl. I think the Senior Bowl is going to be more important than the Combine. Just show that he has improved his overall just game ability to get off blocks, and I think doing that will be able to maybe slide him up to being a 3rd-round pick, probably at the best. But for me, with the uncertainty around him right now for his actual tangible game ability, he's probably going to stay in the late 4th round, early 5th round. So move on to my number 4 on the 5 outside. Again, I mentioned this every video. My 5 outside is not in any particular order. Someone might have projected earlier than others, but overall it's just listed out as 5. So I have the 6'3", 251-pounder out of Wyoming, and that is Eddie Yarbrough. So Yarbrough can play at either the defensive end or the outside linebacker position. Had good stats this year, 7 sacks, 62 tackles. So I think that he needs to add a little bit of weight for the NFL. If he can add maybe 10 pounds while keeping this, I know that's asking a lot, but add 10 pounds, keeping the same speed, that's probably a good rotation guy to have playing at the 4-3 defensive end spot. I think that's the spot he would fit in best at. Alright, so move on to my, I believe, last. See if I can find him here. Okay, so I got the 6', 221-pounder out of OU, and that is Eric Stryker. So again, I know another guy that more fits in at the outside linebacker, edge rusher spot, but again, he's more of an edge rusher than anything to me. And obviously, Eric Stryker's got good speed, runs about a 4.5 to 4.6 40. Will probably fit in well at either a 4-3 or 3-4 outside linebacker spot. I don't think he would really be able to play defensive end. He doesn't, obviously, 221 pounds doesn't really have the size to do it. But he's a guy that's got extremely good speed and will be an extremely good guy at sealing the edge, as he was in Oklahoma. For me, he projects as around a 5th round to 6th round pick. I just think that for his skill set, many people aren't looking for that type of player in the first few rounds. It is a pretty linebacker-heavy draft, and I think he could end up falling because of that. Alright, so that pretty much does it for this video. I posted a defensive tackle one yesterday. If you've not seen that, go check that out. I will be putting the whole playlist in the description below, and there will be 2 of the videos in my outro as well. So that's pretty much it. I will probably be coming back with, I think I'm moving into linebackers tomorrow, so also check that out as well. So that's pretty much it. So coming back with my part 3 of the NFL Draft Big Board. So today I'm doing my wide receiver rankings, and since wide receiver is generally has a deeper amount of picks than quarterback or running back, I'm going to do top 12 instead of top 10. Not a big difference, but anyway, move